time to do this. She had traveled thousands of miles from her home country, leaving behind the familiar streets, her family, and friends she had known all her life. Every step she took toward the small house where she was supposed to live felt heavier than the last, but also filled with hope. She was not sure what to expect. Life in a new country was always a challenge, especially when everything was unknown. But she had promised herself that this was a chance for a fresh start, a chance to build something real, something lasting. As she approached the modest house on the quiet street, she noticed the garden was simple, with a few flowers in bloom and a small vegetable patch at the side. The house itself was old but well kept, with a fresh coat of paint that made it look welcoming. She took a deep breath and stepped up to the door, feeling her heart race. She had seen the man's picture online, and they had exchanged a few letters and calls. But seeing the house in person, knowing she would live here, and meeting him face to face for the first time made her nervous. When the door opened, a man in his early 30s stood there. He had a kind face, but his eyes reflected the uncertainty he was feeling. "Hello," he said softly, offering a small smile. "You must be welcome." "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm but carrying a hint of nervousness. "I'm glad to finally be here." He stepped aside to let her in. The inside of the house was simple but clean. There was a small living room with a couch and a coffee table, and the smell of fresh bread lingered in the air. It was a warm, homely atmosphere, nothing extravagant, just simple comfort. She placed her suitcase in the corner and looked around, trying to imagine herself living here. The first few hours were quiet. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the town, and the distance she had traveled. Each word felt careful, measured, because both of them were unsure of how much to share or how fast to move. The woman had always been independent, used to managing her own life, while the man had never lived with anyone outside his family. They were learning each other's habits and personalities step by step. In the evening, he suggested they take a short walk around the neighborhood. She agreed, hoping it would help them both relax. As they walked, she noticed how peaceful the town was. Children were playing in the yards and neighbors greeted them politely. She felt a mix of relief and excitement. Life here was different from her home country, slower, quieter, but also full of a certain calmness that she liked. "Do you like it here?" he asked, glancing at her. "Yes," she said, smiling. "It is different, but in a good way. It feels peaceful." He nodded. "It takes some time to get used to. I was worried it might feel lonely at first." "I think," she said thoughtfully, "that it is what you make of it. I want to try and make it a home, no matter what it takes." Her words seemed to lighten his expression. He felt a little more at ease, realizing that she was brave and determined. It was not just about being in a new place, it was about making a new life together. Back at the house, they sat down for a simple dinner. They ate quietly at first, each lost in their own thoughts. But slowly, conversation started to flow. She asked about his daily life, his work, and his hobbies. He, in turn, asked about her family, her childhood, and the journey that brought her here. Each answer revealed small details, little pieces of their lives, that made them feel a little closer. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, both felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. Sleeping under the same roof for the first time with someone you hardly know was not easy, even if it was not romantic or intimate. They were learning the boundaries, learning the comfort of silence, and learning that patience would be essential in this new chapter of life. The next few days were filled with practical tasks. She helped around the house, learning how things worked, the washing machine, the heating system, and even simple cooking routines. He tried to make her feel comfortable, showing her where everything was, offering guidance without being overbearing. It was a careful balance, like learning a new dance where both partners had to understand the steps. One afternoon, she decided to take a short walk to explore the town on her own. She discovered a small bakery, a grocery store, and a park where families gathered. The townspeople were polite and welcoming, though some looked curious about the newcomer. She felt a sense of belonging, small but important. She returned home with fresh bread, sharing it with him, and they laughed over minor mishaps, like how she had gotten slightly lost on the way back. As the week went on, small routines formed. They had morning coffee together, talked about their plans for the day, and shared meals. They also began to discuss their expectations for the future. These conversations were sometimes uncomfortable but necessary. Trust was building slowly, like bricks being laid carefully one by one. They were learning that this was not just about living in the same house. It was about understanding each other's values, habits, and dreams. One evening, while sitting on the porch watching the sunset, she spoke softly. "I know this will not be easy," she said. "We come from very different worlds, but I believe we can make this work. I want to try." He looked at her, seeing sincerity in her eyes. "I want to try too," he said. "It will take patience, and I know there will be challenges, but I feel like this is a chance for something real." It was a simple conversation, but it carried weight. Both realized that moving in together was more than a physical act. It was a commitment to learn, adapt, and grow with someone else. Each day would bring new lessons, new misunderstandings, and new joys, but they were ready to face them together. As part one of their journey came to a close, the woman lay in bed that night thinking about the long road she had traveled, not just in miles, but in decisions, sacrifices, and courage. She was far from home, but she was not alone. There was someone beside her, uncertain yet willing, ready to start a new life. And that was the beginning, the very first step of a story that would challenge them, teach them, and perhaps, in time, bring them the life they had hoped for. By the end of the week, the initial awkwardness had softened. They shared small laughs, worked together, and even disagreed without resentment. It was clear that this was only the beginning of a much longer journey. A journey of trust, understanding, and mutual support. A journey that neither of them had fully imagined, but one they were ready to face, step by step. And so, the woman who had come from far away to start a new life had taken her first steps, not just into a house, but into a shared life filled with hope, challenges, and the quiet promise of something meaningful. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope that grew stronger with every passing day. The days passed slowly but steadily, each one bringing new lessons and small victories. The woman had started to feel more comfortable in the house and in the town, though the adjustment was far from easy. The routines she had taken for granted in her old life no longer applied, and she often found herself pausing to understand how things worked here. The man noticed her efforts and tried to make the transition smoother, but he too was learning. Living with someone from a completely different background required patience, understanding, and sometimes a lot of compromise. One morning, the woman woke up early, as she often did, and decided to try cooking breakfast for both of them. She had brought some familiar recipes from home, hoping to recreate a taste of her past. She mixed the ingredients carefully, but soon realized that some spices she was used to were not available in this town. She improvised, using what she could find at the local store. The smell of the cooking drifted through the house, drawing the man into the kitchen. "You're up early," he said, rubbing his eyes. "What are you making?" "Something from home," she replied, smiling. "It may not be the same, but I want to try." He watched her with curiosity as she moved around the small kitchen, chopping, stirring, and tasting. When breakfast was ready, they sat down at the table together. The woman felt a sense of pride when the man took a bite and nodded appreciatively. "It's good," he said simply. "Not like anything I've tried before, but it's nice." Her face lit up. It was a small moment, but it mattered. These small gestures were helping them bridge the gap between their worlds, creating shared experiences that were slowly becoming memories. They realized that life together would be built on these simple, everyday moments as much as on grand gestures. Later that day, the woman decided to visit the local market. She wanted to learn more about the town and its people, and also to buy ingredients for her cooking experiments. The market was bustling, with vendors calling out their prices and customers haggling over goods. She felt a little overwhelmed at first, but soon adapted. She smiled at the sellers, asked questions politely, and even managed to bargain for some fresh vegetables. When she returned home, she shared her purchases with the man. Together, they planned a simple dinner, discussing which dishes to try and how to prepare them. During the preparation, they laughed over small mistakes, spices spilled, pans burned slightly, and dishes turned out differently than expected. But they also celebrated the little successes: a perfectly cooked vegetable, a well-baked loaf of bread, or a new flavor combination that surprised them both. Their growing comfort with each other was not limited to chores and meals. They also began to share stories from their pasts. She talked about her childhood, her family, and the challenges she had faced in her own country. He shared his experiences growing up in the town, the pressures of work, and his dreams for the future. At first, these conversations were careful and cautious, but gradually they became more open. They discovered that despite their different backgrounds, they shared many of the same hopes and fears. One afternoon, a minor disagreement arose. The woman wanted to repaint a room in the house, while the man felt it was unnecessary. Voices were raised slightly, though never harshly. After a few moments of tension, they both paused and realized that arguing would not help. They sat down and talked calmly, explaining their reasons and listening to each other. In the end, they compromised. One wall would be painted, and the rest would remain the same for now. This incident became a turning point for them. They understood that living together meant accepting differences and finding ways to navigate them without resentment. It was not always easy, and there were moments of frustration, but these moments also taught them patience and respect. They were learning that a relationship, any relationship, required effort, understanding, and sometimes letting go of one's own preferences for the sake of harmony. The woman also began exploring the town more, discovering places she could go for walks, small cafes, and quiet spots where she could read or reflect. She sometimes took the man along, and other times went alone, returning with stories of what she had seen and experienced. These outings helped her feel more independent, while also giving the man insight into her perspective. He realized that giving each other space was as important as spending time together. As the weeks went by, they started to notice small changes in themselves. The man became more open and patient, learning to express his thoughts and feelings more freely. The woman became more confident in her new environment, mastering routines, and even making friends with neighbors and local shopkeepers. They were growing together, not just as housemates, but as companions learning to navigate life side by side. One day, a challenge arose that tested their growing bond. A pipe in the house burst, flooding the kitchen and part of the living room. Water spilled across the floor, soaking carpets and furniture. Both of them jumped into action, trying to contain the damage and prevent further flooding. The woman quickly fetched towels and buckets, while the man shut off the main valve and called for a plumber. They worked together, shouting instructions over the sound of rushing water, and somehow managed to minimize the damage. After the chaos settled and the plumber left, they sat down, exhausted and wet, but laughing at the absurdity of the situation. "I guess this is what living together really means," the man said, smiling. "Unexpected problems and teamwork." "Yes," she replied, grinning, "and learning to stay calm under pressure. Moments like these strengthen their bond." They realized that challenges were not obstacles to be feared, but opportunities to work together, to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, and to build trust. It was no longer just about living in the same house. It was about being there for one another, in good times and bad. Evenings became their favorite part of the day. They would sit together on the porch, drinking tea, or simply talking about their day. Sometimes the conversations were lighthearted, filled with laughter and teasing. Other times they were serious, discussing their hopes for the future, personal fears, or plans to improve their lives. Each conversation brought them closer, helping them understand not just the other person, but also themselves. The woman also began to notice small cultural differences in their routines and habits. Things she considered normal were unfamiliar to him, and vice versa. At first, these differences caused minor misunderstandings, like when she tried to introduce a traditional meal from her country, and he found the flavors unusual. But instead of creating tension, these moments became opportunities for learning and compromise. They experimented with recipes, shared stories behind certain foods, and laughed over the differences. Gradually, a sense of friendship and companionship formed between them. They were no longer strangers trying to coexist under the same roof. They were learning to anticipate each other's needs, to communicate clearly, and to respect boundaries. Trust, which had started as a fragile thread, was slowly growing stronger, weaving a safety net of understanding and mutual respect. By the end of part two, both of them had changed in subtle but significant ways. The woman had become more resilient, confident, and adaptable. The man had become more open, patient, and understanding. Together, they were building a foundation not just for living together, but for a meaningful life together. The days were still filled with small challenges, but they no longer seemed insurmountable. Instead, each challenge became a chance to learn, to grow, and to strengthen their bond. Life was far from perfect. There were still moments of doubt, loneliness, and uncertainty. But there was also laughter, shared meals, and a growing sense of partnership. They were learning that real-life relationships required effort, compromise, and a willingness to face difficulties together. And even in the quiet, ordinary moments, making breakfast, running errands, or simply talking over tea, they were discovering the extraordinary strength of human connection. And so, part two of their journey came to a close, leaving them both with a sense of cautious optimism. They had faced challenges, learned important lessons, and begun to build trust. The road ahead would not be easy, but they were no longer unsure of each other. They were partners, learning to live, adapt, and grow together, step by step, day by day. By the time the third month arrived, the woman and the man had settled into a more predictable rhythm. Life was still full of challenges, but they were no longer strangers navigating an awkward arrangement. They had grown accustomed to sharing the same space, and their initial nervousness had started to fade. Yet, while they were more comfortable around each other, deeper understanding required more than just daily routines. It required trust, honesty, and sometimes vulnerability. One sunny morning, the woman woke up with a sense of determination. She had noticed that despite their growing comfort, there were still walls between them, unspoken thoughts, small insecurities, and fears of being misunderstood. She decided it was time to bridge that gap. She went into the kitchen, brewed some tea, and brought it to the living room where the man was reading the newspaper. "I was thinking," she began, sitting down across from him. "We know each other better now, but there is still a lot we don't really talk about. Our pasts, our fears, the things that make us who we are." He looked up, curious but slightly hesitant. "It's true," he admitted. "I haven't really shared much about my childhood or my family. I guess I didn't know where to start." She smiled gently. "I understand. We can start slowly. I want us to feel like we can share anything with each other." That afternoon became a turning point. They began to share stories they had never spoken aloud before. She told him about the challenges she had faced in her childhood, times of struggle, moments of loneliness, and the lessons she had learned about resilience. He listened attentively, occasionally asking questions, showing genuine interest and empathy. Then he shared his own experiences, how he had grown up in a small town, the expectations placed upon him, and the moments when he had felt uncertain about life. As they spoke, a new layer of connection formed between them. They were learning not just about each other, but also about themselves. The act of opening up created trust. They realized that vulnerability was not weakness, it was a bridge that brought people closer. In the following days, they faced another challenge that tested their growing bond. The woman's health took a sudden dip. She developed a high fever and felt weak and dizzy. The man immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and took swift action. He helped her lie down, prepared warm drinks, and monitored her condition carefully. When the fever did not subside, he insisted on calling a doctor and accompanied her to the clinic. During those stressful hours, both discovered how much they could rely on each other. The woman appreciated the man's concern, patience, and calm demeanor, while he admired her courage and composure despite feeling unwell. They realized that support in difficult times was a crucial part of building trust and deepening a relationship. After she recovered, they reflected on the experience. "I felt safe with you," she said quietly one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Even when I was scared, knowing you were there made it easier." He nodded, touched by her words. "And I felt responsible for you. I realized that caring for someone is more than just helping with daily tasks. It's about being there when it really matters." Their experiences in the past few weeks had created a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. They were beginning to think not only about daily routines but also about long-term plans, how they could support each other, grow together, and create a stable life. One weekend, they decided to try something new, a short trip to the countryside. Neither of them had been there before, and the idea of exploring together excited them. They packed a small bag, prepared some food, and set off early in the morning. The drive was filled with conversation, laughter, and shared observations about the changing scenery. When they arrived, they walked along winding paths, noticing wildflowers, birds, and the gentle flow of a nearby stream. They shared stories from their pasts inspired by the natural beauty around them, memories of childhood adventures, moments of fear, and small victories that had shaped them. Walking side by side, they felt a sense of freedom and connection that went beyond the walls of their home. During the trip, a small incident tested their patience. They had forgotten a map and got slightly lost on a trail. At first, frustration threatened to take over, but then they paused, took a deep breath, and worked together to find their way. This moment, like many before, reminded them that challenges were best faced with teamwork, patience, and communication. By the time they returned home, they were not just friends sharing a house. They were companions who had begun to understand and trust each other deeply. Their conversations became more personal and honest. They discussed dreams, fears, and the kind of life they wanted to create. Slowly, they began to imagine a future that included both of them, working together to face challenges and celebrate successes. Even in small daily tasks, their growing connection was evident. Cooking together became a shared activity, with one chopping vegetables while the other stirred the pot. They laughed over mistakes and celebrated small victories, a meal that turned out well, a chore completed efficiently, or even learning a new recipe together. These moments, ordinary as they were, carried profound significance. They were learning that a strong relationship was built on everyday actions, patience, and mutual respect. In addition to shared routines, they also encouraged each other to pursue personal goals. The woman enrolled in a short language course to improve her communication skills, while the man started a small home project he had postponed for years. They cheered each other on, shared tips, and celebrated progress. Supporting each other in personal growth became another way to strengthen their bond. As Part 3 progressed, their relationship moved from simple coexistence to genuine friendship and partnership. They began to anticipate each other's needs, share responsibilities more naturally, and communicate openly about expectations and challenges. They discovered that compromise was not a loss but a way to grow together, and that understanding each other's perspectives created harmony and trust. One evening, as autumn leaves fell outside, they sat by the fireplace, reflecting on their journey so far. "It's strange," the woman said softly. "When I first arrived, everything felt so new, so uncertain. Now it feels like we're building something real step by step." He smiled, nodding. "Yes, I didn't know what to expect, but I'm glad we are learning together. Life is not perfect, but we are learning to face it as a team." They both realized that life together was not about grand gestures or sudden moments of revelation. It was about steady effort, understanding, and learning from both successes and mistakes. It was about trust built through small acts of care, respect, and patience. The woman also began to notice how much she had changed. She was more confident, resilient, and patient. She had learned to navigate new challenges, communicate clearly, and adapt to unfamiliar situations. Similarly, the man noticed his own growth. He had become more empathetic, open, and willing to step out of his comfort zone. They were not just shaping their shared life, they were shaping themselves. By the end of part 3, they had reached a deeper level of understanding and connection. They had faced challenges, celebrated small victories, and learned to support each other in meaningful ways. Their relationship had transformed from polite coexistence into genuine friendship and partnership, marked by trust, communication, and mutual respect. Though the future remained uncertain, they no longer felt alone in facing it. They had discovered that real-life relationships required patience, effort, and understanding, and that growth often came through shared challenges and small, everyday moments. Their journey was far from over, but they had taken significant steps toward building a life together, one filled with hope, resilience, and a quiet, steady companionship. And so, as the third part of their story closed, both the woman and the man looked forward to the days ahead, aware that while challenges would continue, they were no longer strangers trying to adapt. They were partners, learning, growing, and walking the path of life together, step by step, day by day, with trust and understanding guiding them forward. By the time several months had passed, the woman and the man had grown even closer. They had settled into routines, learned to communicate better, and discovered ways to support each other in daily life. Yet, while comfort had grown, life still had unexpected challenges to test their patience, resilience, and teamwork. Part 4 of their journey focused on facing real-life problems together and discovering the true strength of partnership. One Monday morning, the man received news that the local community center, where he had volunteered occasionally, needed urgent help to organize a small fundraising event. He knew he could manage it alone, but he also knew that planning and executing such an event would take time and effort. He approached the woman, hoping she could help him with some of the preparations. "I'm going to help organize an event at the community center," he said cautiously, unsure if she would be willing. "Would you like to help me?" The woman smiled warmly. "Of course. It sounds like a great opportunity to get to know the town and contribute. Plus, I'd like to help you." Together, they began planning the event. They created lists of tasks, contacted local vendors, and coordinated volunteers. The process was not without its difficulties. There were miscommunications with some vendors, unexpected shortages of supplies, and moments of stress when tasks seemed overwhelming. But each challenge was met with cooperation. When the woman felt anxious about a last-minute problem, the man calmly reassured her, and together they brainstormed solutions. Their teamwork was impressive to others. Volunteers noticed their coordination, patience, and ability to solve problems without arguing. They were becoming not only partners in daily life, but also reliable collaborators in projects outside the home. The woman realized that sharing responsibilities and working together strengthened both their confidence and their relationship. After weeks of preparation, the event finally took place. It was a small but meaningful gathering with food stalls, games for children, and a few performances by local artists. The woman helped manage one of the booths, greeting visitors and sharing stories about her home country, which fascinated many attendees. The man handled the logistics and ensured everything ran smoothly. By the end of the day, the event had raised enough funds to support the center's projects, and both felt a deep sense of accomplishment. "That was amazing," the woman said as they packed up the remaining supplies. "I never imagined we could pull something like this off together." He smiled, brushing his hair back. "We work well as a team. I think we're learning more than just how to plan an event. We're learning how to face challenges together." Soon after the community event, another challenge arose, this one closer to home. During a particularly rainy week, a small leak developed in the roof of their house. Water seeped into one corner of the living room, damaging a small part of the ceiling. At first, both felt frustrated, knowing they would have to fix it quickly to prevent further damage. However, they approached the problem systematically. They researched repair methods online, visited local hardware stores, and carefully prepared the necessary materials. The man climbed onto the roof while the woman assisted from below, holding tools and providing guidance. It was tiring work, and at times they got soaked in the rain, but the shared effort brought laughter and satisfaction. By the end of the day, the leak was fixed, and they both realized how much stronger they had become together, not just emotionally, but practically. As weeks went by, they also began planning for small, long-term projects. One idea was to cultivate a vegetable garden in the backyard. Both had little experience with gardening, but they were excited to try. They researched soil preparation, seeds, and watering techniques. Planting together became a routine, digging, watering, and checking on growth. Watching the tiny sprouts emerge from the soil became a symbol of their own growth as individuals and as partners. During this period, they also began spending time with neighbors and building connections in the community. They visited a nearby park for weekend walks, attended town events, and invited neighbors over for small meals. Through these activities, the woman began to feel more at home, and the man felt proud to introduce her as someone who had become part of the town's life. These small social interactions strengthened their bond and created a sense of belonging that was important for both of them. However, life was not only about accomplishments and community work. There were quiet, reflective moments too. One evening, as they sat on the porch under a starry sky, they spoke about their personal dreams. The woman shared her wish to continue her education in a small course nearby, while the man admitted he wanted to start a small side business to support local artisans. They discussed ways to support each other's goals, realizing that encouragement and practical help were as important as emotional support. "I want us to grow together," the woman said softly. "Not just live together, but help each other achieve what we want in life." He nodded, feeling deeply connected. "I feel the same way. We've faced so many small challenges, but I think they've taught us how to support each other, and I want to continue doing that always." Their daily routines also became more comfortable. Cooking, cleaning, shopping, and managing household chores became shared responsibilities. They learned each other's preferences, habits, and ways of doing things. Sometimes disagreements arose over how to arrange furniture, what to cook, or how to spend a weekend, but these moments were brief. They had learned to compromise, communicate clearly, and value the other's opinion. Even small acts of kindness strengthened their bond. The man began leaving little notes for the woman in the morning, wishing her a good day or encouraging her in her tasks. She started making small treats or preparing a special cup of tea for him after a long day. These gestures, though simple, communicated care, attention, and thoughtfulness, essential ingredients for trust and lasting connection. As Part 4 continued, a new challenge emerged, one that required emotional support rather than practical solutions. The woman received a call from her family back home, who were facing a difficult situation. She felt torn between wanting to be there for them and remaining committed to her new life. The man noticed her distress and offered comfort, listening patiently and helping her think through practical ways to provide support from afar. "This is hard," she admitted one evening, tears in her eyes. "I want to help them, but I feel so far away." He held her hand gently. "I know it's difficult, but you're not alone. We'll find a way to help together. You don't have to carry this alone." The support he offered made a profound impact. She realized that living together meant not just sharing daily routines but also sharing emotional burdens. Being able to rely on someone during moments of vulnerability was a key part of building a life together. By the end of Part 4, both of them had experienced growth, challenges, and achievements that strengthened their relationship. They had faced unexpected problems, worked together on meaningful projects, and supported each other emotionally. Their bond had deepened beyond simple companionship into true partnership. They also understood the value of patience, communication, and shared responsibility. Life was not always easy, and challenges would continue, but they had learned to face them together. The small victories, the laughter during tough times, and the quiet moments of reflection were all part of the journey. As the autumn turned to winter, they sat together in the living room, sipping tea and watching the soft glow of the fireplace. The warmth of the fire mirrored the growing warmth in their relationship, a warmth built not on perfection, but on understanding, trust, and effort. They realized that Part 4 of their journey was about discovering the strength that comes from working together, supporting each other, and growing side by side. It was about turning challenges into opportunities, and learning that life was more meaningful when shared with someone who truly cared. And so, as the fourth part of their story concluded, both the woman and the man looked forward to the future with cautious optimism. They knew that life would continue to present difficulties, but they had also learned that together, they could face them. They were no longer two individuals navigating a new arrangement. They were partners, growing stronger with each passing day, ready to face whatever life had in store for them next. The months had passed, and the woman and the man had reached a point where their lives had intertwined in a way that neither had anticipated. They had faced challenges, celebrated small victories, and learned the value of patience, understanding, and mutual support. Now, as they approached the final part of their journey, they began to reflect on everything they had accomplished together and what the future might hold. The first signs of winter had arrived. The mornings were crisp, and the first snow lightly dusted the town. They woke up early one day, noticing the sparkling white covering the streets, trees, and rooftops. The woman opened the curtains and smiled. "It's beautiful," she said. "The whole town looks like it's wrapped in magic." The man joined her at the window, nodding. "It really does. I'm glad we can enjoy it together." That day, they decided to take a long walk around the town, bundled in warm coats and scarves. The snow crunched beneath their feet, and they laughed at the playful footprints they left behind. As they walked, they reflected on the journey they had shared, the first awkward days, the small victories, and the challenges that had brought them closer. "I can't believe how far we've come," the woman said. "When I first arrived, I was nervous about everything, the house, the town, even you. I didn't know what to expect." He smiled gently. "I felt the same way, but look at us now. We've learned to work together, support each other, and even enjoy life despite the challenges." Their conversation that day was filled with gratitude and reflection. They realized that life had not been perfect, but it had been meaningful. They had grown individually and together, learning important lessons about trust, patience, and understanding. Back at home, they focused on completing a long-term project they had started months earlier, the vegetable garden. The snow had made the soil hard, but they worked together to prepare the garden for the coming spring. They cleared leaves, pruned plants, and set up protective covers. Though it was hard work, they found joy in doing it side by side. As they worked, they talked about their dreams for the future. The woman expressed her desire to continue her studies and maybe start a small hobby business, while the man shared plans to expand his work with the community and pursue his interests in local projects. They discussed ways to support each other, realizing that a strong partnership meant helping the other achieve their goals, not just focusing on shared activities. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat by the fireplace, sipping warm drinks. The fire crackled softly, and the quiet of the winter night filled the room. They began talking about the people who had supported them along the way, the neighbors who had welcomed the woman, the local vendors who had shared advice, and friends who had encouraged them both. These reflections reminded them that while they had grown together, they were also part of a larger community. The following week, the woman received news that her family back home was doing better. She was relieved and grateful, and the man shared in her happiness. They celebrated together with a simple meal, laughing and sharing stories from their pasts. Moments like these reinforced their bond, showing that joy could be multiplied when shared with someone who cared deeply. As the story continued, they also began thinking about the future of the house they shared. They discussed small renovations, such as painting a wall, adding shelves, and improving the garden. These projects were not about luxury. They were about creating a home that reflected both of them and their shared life. They worked together on each task, learning more about each other's preferences, habits, and ways of approaching problems. During this period, their daily routines had also become more balanced. They had learned to divide household responsibilities in ways that suited both of them. Cooking, cleaning, shopping, and other chores were no longer sources of stress or conflict, but opportunities to work together. Each small act of cooperation reinforced their sense of partnership and trust. One particularly quiet evening, as snow fell softly outside, the woman turned to the man. "Do you remember our first week here?" she asked. "I was so nervous, unsure of everything. Now I feel settled, I feel at home." He looked at her, a soft smile on his face. "I do remember. I felt the same way. I was nervous, not sure how we would manage. But now, seeing what we've built together, I feel proud and happy." It was in moments like these, quiet, reflective, and sincere, that they truly appreciated how far they had come. They realized that building a life together was not about sudden changes or dramatic events. It was about consistency, patience, small gestures, and a willingness to grow together. As winter progressed, they decided to celebrate the season with small traditions of their own. They decorated the house with simple lights, baked cookies, and created small rituals that made the home feel warm and inviting. These moments were about more than decoration. They were about creating memories, enjoying the present, and strengthening their bond. They also reflected on the lessons they had learned. Communication had become key, listening carefully, expressing thoughts clearly, and being patient when misunderstandings arose. Trust had grown steadily through shared experiences, challenges, and moments of vulnerability. And most importantly, they had learned the importance of mutual respect, support, and understanding in building a meaningful relationship. One afternoon, the man suggested they take a small trip to a nearby hill to watch the sunset. They packed a light snack, wrapped themselves in warm clothing, and walked up the hill together. The view was breathtaking, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, the town below blanketed in snow. They sat quietly, holding hands, feeling the serenity and peace of the moment. "This feels perfect," the woman said softly. "Not because everything is perfect, but because we're here together." He nodded. "Exactly. Life isn't about perfection. It's about moments like this, shared, meaningful, and real." As the sun dipped below the horizon, they felt a sense of calm and contentment. They had faced uncertainties, navigated challenges, and grown together in ways they had never imagined. They were no longer two individuals unsure of the future. They were partners, ready to face life's ups and downs together. Back at home, they continued their routines with a sense of harmony and understanding. They worked on household projects, pursued personal goals, and engaged with the community. Their relationship had evolved into one marked by respect, friendship, and a quiet, steady love that grew from shared experiences and mutual care. By the end of Part 5, they had created a life that was balanced, fulfilling, and hopeful. They had discovered the importance of patience, communication, and support, realizing that true connection required effort, understanding, and shared responsibility. Each challenge they faced had strengthened their bond, and each small victory had added to their shared story. On a quiet evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, the woman reflected aloud. "I never imagined life could feel like this. Full of challenges, yes, but also full of meaning, growth, and happiness. I'm glad we've built this life together." He took her hand gently, squeezing it. "Me too. We've come a long way and we'll continue to grow. Life will have more challenges, but now I know we can face anything together." Their story had reached a point of stability and hope. They were no longer navigating uncertainty. They had created a partnership grounded in trust, shared effort, and emotional connection. They understood that life would continue to present obstacles, but they were ready to meet them, side by side, with patience, respect, and care. As the night drew to a close, the couple sat quietly, watching the fire and listening to the soft sounds of winter outside. They felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that they had grown together, built trust, and created a meaningful life. The journey had been long, sometimes difficult, but ultimately rewarding. And so, the final chapter of their story ended not with grand declarations, but with the quiet certainty that they had found something rare and valuable: companionship, trust, and a shared life built on understanding, patience, and love. They were ready for whatever the future might bring, confident that together they could face anything.